What if your greatest gift could also be your greatest curse? For empaths, their deep sensitivity can either transform them into powerful healers or trap them in a lifetime of pain, guilt, and isolation. Carl Jung discovered that empathy isn't just kindness, it's a dangerous psychological force. When unconscious, it destroys. When mastered, it becomes humanity's medicine. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more hidden history and psychology uncovered. Jung's warning about empaths was not about emotional sensitivity. It was about psychic absorption and why this ability is more dangerous than most think. He wrote about people with what he called archetypal vulnerability. These empaths unconsciously absorb the shadow material and hidden projections of those around them. Jung's warning was serious because he discovered that empaths without strong boundaries become containers for other people's repressed trauma, rage, and archetypal forces. Often losing their own identity in the process, he explained that empathic sensitivity can either destroy a person's sense of self or, if understood, transform them into someone able to work consciously with the human shadow. One patient revealed this clearly. A young woman came to Jung speaking in voices that were not her own. She cried tears for strangers and carried emotions that did not belong to her. Most troubling, she had forgotten her own name. What made her case undeniable was that everything she felt about others turned out to be correct hidden depression, unspoken rage, and trauma. She absorbed all of it with frightening accuracy. "I am everyone and no one," she told Jung. "I know what hurts in every person I meet, but I cannot remember what it feels like to be myself." Her empathy had gone beyond feeling into what Jung later called unconscious possession. She became a container for the collective unconscious projections of those around her. Jung traced this back to childhood survival. She learned to read her father's moods to avoid his violence. But years of living this way dissolved her boundaries until she no longer lived as a whole person, but as fragments of others. This showed Jung's deeper warning. Empaths do not only feel emotions, they absorb personality fragments, shadow projections, and archetypal material that erase their sense of self. He described three main processes of this psychic invasion. The first was shadow magnetism, which works like gravity. Empaths attract the hidden material others refuse to face. This happens through projective identification. When someone cannot face their own rage, shame, or grief, they unconsciously push it onto a sensitive person. The empath, without defense, accepts it as their own. One case involved a man who suppressed grief over his father's death for 20 years. When he met an empath, that sorrow transferred instantly, like an electric current. The empath felt sudden grief without knowing it was not their own. The second process Jung called archetypal hijacking. Here, powerful patterns, like the wounded healer, the martyr, or the cosmic mother, use empathic sensitivity to enter. These forces slowly replace the empath's personality with compulsive rescue behaviors. It begins subtly, with feelings of being called to heal or save. But soon, they confuse these ancient compulsions with their true desires. Jung wrote that the wounded healer whispers, "Your pain has value only if it serves others." The empath, desperate for meaning, surrenders their will without realizing they are possessed. The third stage he described was identity liquefaction. Here, chronic absorption dissolves the self entirely. Advanced cases showed empaths unable to separate their emotions from those they absorbed. They lost access to their own feelings and lived only as collections of fragments from others. Jung wrote that the empath becomes a psychological cemetery holding the unfelt lives of others, while their own soul fades from neglect. He discovered that damaged people unconsciously seek out narcissists and emotional exploiters have an instinct to find them. They do not plan this, but are driven by what Jung called shadow hunger, a need to unload their pain onto someone else. These predators appear as deeply wounded souls, triggering the empath's rescue drive. They create trauma bonds that make the empath feel responsible for their stability. Over time, they become addicted to the empath's energy, using them to regulate emotions they refuse to face themselves. The empath, drained and confused, becomes weaker as the predator grows stronger. Jung's files showed the painful truth. The empath's greatest gift attracts those who never want to heal. Their compassion becomes their weakness. Jung mapped for stages of empathic destruction. Stage 1, the overwhelmed innocent, feels everything but understands nothing. Crowds exhaust them, feelings appear from nowhere, and they may suffer anxiety or depression without knowing they are carrying others' pain. One teacher Jung studied had panic attacks in class, absorbing the stress of 30 students at once. Stage 2 is the compulsive fixer. Here, empaths discover their purpose in rescuing others. They mistake codependency for love and believe they are valuable only when solving someone else's crisis. Jung called this savior syndrome. Their relationships follow patterns. They bond with wounded people, give everything to heal them, then collapse when the person recovers or refuses to change. Stage 3 is the spiritual martyr. These empaths use spiritual ideas to explain their self-destruction. They call boundary violations, unconditional love, and exhaustion a service to humanity. Jung warned this stage was the most dangerous. Because the empath convinces themselves their suffering is noble, Jung warned that this stage is especially dangerous because empaths develop clever justifications for their suffering. They convince themselves that their pain has a higher purpose, that they are light bearers who must absorb the world's darkness. This spiritual self-deception makes them resistant to healing, since real recovery would threaten their carefully built identity as noble sufferers. Stage 4, which Jung called the identity ghost, marks complete psychological collapse. At this point, empaths have absorbed so much foreign material that almost nothing of their original self remains. They move through life as collections of borrowed emotions, secondhand memories, and fragments of other people's personalities. Jung recorded chilling cases in which such empaths spoke in many different voices during therapy, displayed emotions that contradicted their own circumstances, and described feeling like empty vessels filled only with strangers' experiences. One patient said, "I am a collection of everyone I tried to save, but I cannot find the person who started this collection." Jung explained that this progression is not always inevitable, yet without conscious effort to stop it, most empaths slowly drift toward complete self. Each stage represents the psyche's desperate attempt to survive overwhelming absorption, but each step also pushes the empath further from their authentic self. Why is this process so deadly? Jung described what he called the absorption crisis. His research revealed that empathic sensitivity becomes dangerous, even lethal to the psyche, when it remains unconscious. The first element is personality fragmentation. Empaths collect psychological fragments from nearly everyone they encounter. Over time, their original self becomes buried beneath these layers. They no longer access their true emotions, their real preferences, or even their own memories. Jung showed how this decline occurs gradually. At first, empaths lose clarity about their opinions, often agreeing with whoever is speaking to them. They cannot separate their own perspective from the perspectives they've absorbed. Later, their emotional responses turn unpredictable. They might laugh at funerals or cry during celebrations, responding not to the present reality, but to fragments carried from other people. Finally, their ability to make decisions collapses. They no longer know what they genuinely want, only what others expect of them. Another danger is vicarious trauma accumulation, which Jung described as inherited PTSD. Empaths develop trauma symptoms from experiences that never happened to them. They carry the emotional wounds of parents, partners, friends, and even strangers. The result is real psychological damage, with no obvious source. One case Jung treated involved a woman who suffered recurring nightmares of World War I trenches. Even though she was born decades after the war, careful exploration revealed she had absorbed these images and feelings from her grandfather's unresolved combat trauma. She showed the full range of PTSD symptoms: panic attacks, hypervigilance, emotional numbing, all from memories that were not her own. The most dangerous stage is the archetypal possession crisis. Here, massive psychological forces, such as the archetype of the wounded healer or the eternal martyr, completely take over the empath's conscious personality. They become convinced that their purpose is to suffer so that others may heal. This belief makes them resistant to any recovery. Jung wrote that possessed empaths often develop what he called sacred suffering syndrome. They see their pain as having cosmic significance. To heal themselves would feel selfish, even spiritually corrupt. Because of this, normal therapy often fails, since the empath believes letting go of pain would betray their mission. Another collapse Jung described is reality distortion syndrome. At this stage, empaths can no longer separate their own experiences from the projections they absorb. They live inside a confusing storm of authentic and foreign feelings. never certain which thoughts or memories actually belong to them. Jung documented patients who became nearly incapable of daily living. One described it as, "I live in a house where each room belongs to someone else, but I cannot remember which room is mine." To answer this crisis, Jung developed what he called boundary alchemy. His goal was not to destroy empathic sensitivity, but to transform unconscious absorption into conscious perception. He created methods that helped empaths separate what belonged to them from what belonged to others, regaining control without losing their ability to feel. One method was the archaeological dig process. Jung compared this to excavating an ancient site. The empath must carefully uncover their authentic self, buried beneath many layers of absorbed material. This begins with identifying which emotions and beliefs truly belong to them, and which were taken from parents, friends, partners, or strangers. Jung gave his patients specific practices for this emotional archaeology. They were told to track their emotional states daily. Each time a strong feeling appeared, they asked, "Does this emotion match my life situation? When did I first feel this way? Who was I with when it started?" By asking these questions, many discovered that their deepest emotions were not their own, but had been absorbed from others. The process was slow, like uncovering historical artifacts layer by layer. Some emotions traced back to childhood, others to recent encounters, and many had no true connection to the empath's personal life at all. Jung taught that this careful sorting was the only way for empaths to find their true identity again. He also created shadow sorting protocols. These trained empaths to analyze their feelings in real time. When a powerful wave of emotion arose, they asked, "Who does this belong to? Does it match my reality right now?" By practicing this, empaths developed what Jung called psychic forensics, the skill of tracing psychological material back to its source. Jung instructed patients to keep detailed emotional journals, recording not only the feelings themselves, but also the people, environments, and events connected to them. Over time, clear patterns emerged. Certain individuals consistently triggered specific emotions. Certain places always caused the same reactions. Empaths realized much of what drained them did not originate within their own psyche. Jung also taught archetypal negotiation techniques. Using active imagination, he guided empaths to establish conscious dialogue with archetypal forces. Instead of being controlled by the wounded healer or the eternal martyr, they learned to speak with these energies almost as if negotiating with another being. For example, the wounded healer might appear in imagination as an ancient figure demanding constant sacrifice. The empath could then reply, "I will help, but not at the cost of destroying myself. I will serve healing, but I will not carry another's pain as my own." Archetypal energy transformed from an invasive possession into a cooperative ally. Jung further developed what he called energetic container construction. This involved building semi-permeable psychological boundaries. He taught empaths to visualize themselves surrounded by a flexible but protective membrane. This boundary allowed compassion and love to flow freely while filtering out toxic or destructive emotional material. With practice, the boundary became automatic, allowing empaths to remain sensitive without being consumed. The goal was not numbness, but conscious empathy. The ability to feel deeply while remaining rooted in one's own centered history gave Jung many examples of the two possible outcomes of empathy: destruction or mastery. He studied figures like Virginia Woolf, whose diaries and letters revealed a pattern of empathic absorption. She carried the grief and trauma of her family, the chaos of her social circle, and what she described as the cotton wool of modern society. Her sensitivity turned into a channel for forces she could not separate or control. She described herself as a recording consciousness that absorbed everything yet belonged to nothing. This constant invasion eventually led to her collapse. But there were also examples of mastery. Figures like Maya Angelou displayed conscious empathy rather than unconscious absorption. Angelou endured trauma and suffering, yet she learned to transform those experiences into art and wisdom without letting them destroy her. She could feel the pain of her community, but she expressed it through creativity rather than carrying it silently inside her. Jung saw such examples as proof that empathy, when transformed through conscious boundaries, could become not a curse, but a gift. The difference between collapse and mastery lay in awareness. Unconscious empaths dissolve under the weight of borrowed emotions, conscious empaths learn to witness pain without merging with it. Jung believed this transformation was not only possible but necessary for human survival in a world where psychic material flows constantly between people. His work showed that empathy left unguarded can erase a person's identity. But with boundary alchemy, it can become a path of deep wisdom and healing. Angelo demonstrated conscious empathy through her rare ability to witness and transform collective trauma without being destroyed by it. Her autobiographical works reveal someone who carried human suffering with depth and clarity, while maintaining strong personal boundaries. She embodied what Jung described as alchemical empathy, the ability to turn pain into wisdom for both herself and others, without sacrificing her authentic self in the process. The difference lies in integration. Successful empaths build structures around their sensitivity. They create daily practices for clearing away absorbed material and develop supportive communities that understand their unique psychological needs. They serve from strength, not from sacrifice. Failed empaths, on the other hand, lack these protections. Over time, they dissolve into the collective emotional field, until no authentic self remains to protect their choices or preserve their psychological integrity. Jung recognized that empaths require sanctuary spaces and communities that honor sensitivity while teaching boundaries. Without such support, they remain vulnerable to predation and isolation. Healthy allies can be recognized by certain signals. They understand energy dynamics without bypassing reality, balance compassion with self, and can talk about boundaries without dismissing the importance of empathy. Jung taught empaths to look for behavioral markers in those around them. Do they respect? No, without argument. Can they discuss emotions without being overwhelmed or dismissive? Do they keep their own boundaries while supporting others? Do they know the difference between empathy and absorption? The healthiest companions embody what Jung called integrated sensitivity. They feel deeply, yet remain centered. They witness pain without rushing to fix it. They offer support without becoming enmeshed. And they remain grounded even in the middle of chaos. By contrast, predators reveal themselves through warning signs. Some quickly unload emotional material on new acquaintances. Others resist attempts at boundary setting or use guilt and manipulation to hold on to empathic energy. Jung identified several predatory patterns: emotional vampires who leave empaths drained while feeling lighter themselves, trauma dumpers who spill intimate details within minutes of meeting, boundary pushers who ignore rejection and persist, guilt manipulators who frame self-care as selfishness. The most dangerous are sophisticated predators who understand empathic psychology. They study patterns, learn triggers, and design their manipulation carefully. Often they present themselves as wounded souls in need of saving, triggering rescue impulses with staged vulnerability. The creation of sacred space is therefore essential. Such communities honor empathic gifts, but also encourage psychological maturity. They validate sensitivity without enabling self-destruction. They encourage both service to others and fierce self-protection. Jung insisted that empaths need communities which understand their special psychological needs, regular solitude for processing absorbed energy, validation of their gifts without pressure to heal everyone, support for setting boundaries without shame, and practical guidance for managing overwhelm. Healthy empath communities work on the principle of conscious compassion, deep care, combined with firm boundaries, emotional support without enabling unhealthy dependence, and commitment to both personal growth and mutual aid. Jung warned of toxic groups that disguise themselves as healing spaces while secretly exploiting empathic energy. Such communities thrive on guilt, shame, and spiritual superiority. They discourage boundaries, glorify spiritual bypassing, and keep members dependent instead of guiding them toward sovereignty. For many empaths, professional help is also required. But traditional therapy often misses the mark, dismissing sensitivity as pathology. Jung emphasized the need for therapists who understand energy dynamics as well as psychological ones. Effective therapists help empaths recognize their sensitivity as a strength, while providing tools to manage it practically and sustainably, the transformation journey of the empath, according to Jung, unfolds in 5 predictable stages. The first is crisis recognition. This usually follows a collapse, what appears to be nervous breakdown, chronic illness, or complete emotional exhaustion. After years of carrying others' burdens, the empath's system simply breaks down. This collapse often follows a relationship ending, when the empath realizes they've been carrying their partner's emotions for years. It might appear as workplace burnout from absorbing the stress of colleagues, or a family crisis where their role as caretaker becomes unbearable. The crisis forces recognition. The old way of living is unsustainable. Jung called this the dark night of the empath's soul, a necessary shattering before rebirth. The second stage is boundary archaeology. Here, the empath learns to separate personal emotions from absorbed ones, to practice energetic clearing, and to protect themselves in high-risk environments. They become detectives of their own inner life, asking, what feelings are truly mine? What shifted after this interaction? What am I carrying that doesn't belong to me? Jung recommended periods of isolation to rediscover baseline emotions, followed by careful reintroduction into social life while tracking changes. The discoveries can be shocking. Entire years spent living others' lives, carrying ancestral trauma, or absorbing beliefs that contradict their true values. The third stage is archetypal dialogue. This requires facing the unconscious forces that drive compulsive rescuing. Jung taught empaths to use active imagination, engaging with figures like the wounded healer or eternal mother. They must renegotiate their role. I will serve, but not destroy myself. I will care, but not absorb another's suffering as my own. This stage is intense. As empaths confront their addiction to being needed, their fear of abandonment, and the emptiness they feel when not defined by others' problems. The fourth stage is identity reclamation. Jung compared this to restoring an artifact buried beneath layers of debris. Empaths must recover their true preferences, desires, and feelings, what they actually enjoy, what they truly believe, and what they honestly want. It is a process of grief because they must mourn the false self built on others' projections. It also demands courage because they will disappoint people who prefer them in their depleted, compliant state. The final stage is conscious service. Here, sensitivity becomes refined and mastered. The empath can feel deeply, extend genuine healing, and support others without losing themselves. Jung described this as empathic mastery, the point where empathy has transformed from vulnerability into power, from suffering into wisdom. This is the alchemy of the empath's journey, not to abandon their gift, but to wield it with strength and sovereignty through conscious intention rather than unconscious compulsion. Some empaths reach a point where their sensitivity becomes a gift instead of a burden. Jung described these rare individuals as conscious vessels. They are able to hold space for the suffering of others without being consumed by it, to offer healing that comes from strength rather than depletion, and to serve collective transformation while maintaining their own wholeness. This state is not achieved overnight. Jung noted that it often takes years of inner work, dedication, and the willingness to face one's own shadows. But the reward is profound. Empaths who once drowned in the world's pain emerge as powerful forces for healing, rather than casualties of their own sensitivity. Yet even in this development, dangers lurk. Integration carries hazards, and transformation hides traps that can easily derail progress. One of the most common pitfalls is what Jung called the spiritual superiority trap. Here, an empath begins using their sensitivity as proof of being more advanced than others, avoiding the humbling work of continued psychological growth. Newly awakened empaths often fall into what Jung described as enlightenment pride, convincing themselves that their deep feelings make them more spiritually evolved. They start to see people with firm boundaries as cold or unfeeling, and those who refuse to carry others' pain as selfish or unconscious. This judgment masks a defense mechanism. Instead of examining their own unhealthy absorption patterns, they recast them as spiritual gifts. Instead of developing healthier limits, they dismiss boundary setting as regression. In truth, this trap blocks real progress, reinforcing the very behaviors that need to be transformed. Other empaths swing to the opposite extreme, falling into the trap of boundary rigidity. Having lived for years without protection, they finally discover the power of boundaries, but then build walls so tall that nothing can get through. Toxic energy is kept out, but so is genuine connection. Jung saw many empaths who went from being painfully porous to emotionally numb, cutting themselves off from the very sensitivity that made them unique healers. This overcorrection is often born from terror, a desperate attempt never to feel overwhelmed again. But Jung emphasized that healthy boundaries are not walls, they are membranes. They filter rather than block, allowing choice about what enters and what does not. Without this flexibility, sensitivity is not transformed, it is buried. Another common hazard is the rescue relapse. Many empaths, after working hard to establish boundaries, begin to feel guilty for protecting their energy. They slip back into old absorption patterns, convinced that they are selfish for no longer sacrificing themselves. This regression is often fueled by the resistance of others, family, friends, or partners who were once used to unlimited emotional caretaking, now push back. They may say things like, "You've become so cold," or "You're not the caring person I used to know." These comments trigger guilt and self-doubt. Because the empath's identity has been tied so deeply to being helpful, any act of self-protection feels like betrayal. Jung noted that this moment of guilt often marks the final test. The empath must choose between maintaining others' comfort or protecting their own psychological integrity. Still, others fall into the isolation perfectionism trap, withdrawing from relationships entirely and justifying it as self-care or spiritual practice. These empaths avoid intimacy, claiming it is necessary for their energy, when in reality, it is a form of imbalance. Jung saw this not as protection, but avoidance. Real integration means learning to navigate human connection consciously, not hiding from it. Empaths' gifts are meant for relationship and community, not solitude and withdrawal. The true challenge lies in maintaining sensitivity while still engaging meaningfully with others, not in escaping human contact altogether. The highest calling of the empath was not merely personal survival, but collective healing. He believed that conscious empaths serve humanity's evolution by becoming bridges between individual growth and larger transformation. They can process collective shadow material without being destroyed by it, allowing cultural traumas, inherited family wounds, and archetypal patterns to be transformed rather than perpetuated. Humanity, Jung observed, constantly wrestles with collective shadows, disowned parts of the psyche projected onto marginalized groups or enemy nations. Conscious empaths are capable of feeling these shadows without being possessed by them. In doing so, they help societies recognize and reintegrate what has been rejected. Throughout history, such individuals have appeared in many forms. Shamans carried the pain of their tribes and returned it as wisdom. Artists absorbed the collective despair of their time and turned it into transformative expression. Healers shouldered communal wounds that individuals could not bear alone. Jung noted that empaths, when unconscious, simply transmit trauma from one generation to the next, but when conscious, they become family healers, breaking cycles of inherited pain. Wars endured by grandparents, abuse suffered by parents, oppression carried by ancestors, all of these can live in an empath's psyche. Without awareness, the burden continues. With integration, it ends. This function extends beyond family. Empaths often feel the psychological toll of social injustice, environmental destruction, and cultural disconnection long before others notice. Jung saw this as an evolutionary gift. Conscious empaths become society's early warning system, sensing the damage that destructive systems cause to the collective psyche before collapse arrives. Their discomfort points to where healing is needed most. When integrated, they are able not only to identify wounds, but also to mobilize action, demonstrating that empathy is not weakness, but a force for transformation. Such individuals embody what Jung called individuated compassion. Their deep care for others strengthens rather than diminishes their own wholeness. They prove that sensitivity and strength are not opposites, that healing others does not require martyrdom, and that it is possible to feel collective pain without drowning in it. They model a way of being that is urgently needed in a world fractured by division and shadow. Jung envisioned these empaths as pioneers of consciousness evolution. By maintaining personal sovereignty while serving collective well-being, they show others that a new path is possible. Their integration creates a ripple effect. As more empaths embody conscious mastery, they generate a field that makes it easier for others to develop healthy sensitivity. They become living templates of psychological maturity, offering humanity a way out of the false choice between numbing out or burning out in the end. Empathy itself is not the danger. Jung's warning was clear. Empathy is a double-edged capacity. It can be your greatest vulnerability or your most powerful gift. The difference lies entirely in whether you remain unconscious or develop mastery over your patterns of absorption. The real darkness is not sensitivity, but the unawareness that turns sensitive people into dumping grounds for collective pain. What you call weakness is proof that you have been carrying burdens never meant to be yours. Your empathic perception is advanced psychological equipment, rare and precious. But without integration, it becomes a curse that slowly erases your sense of self. Jung's path is one of transformation, turning unconscious absorption into conscious alchemy. It teaches you to witness suffering without being consumed by it, to heal from strength rather than depletion, and to wield sensitivity as a precision tool rather than an uncontrolled flood. The world does not need more broken empaths, needs conscious ones. People who can feel collective pain without losing themselves. People who can offer genuine healing without self-destruction. People who model sovereignty in a world drowning in projection. If you recognize yourself in these struggles, remember this truth: your sensitivity is not your curse. When mastered, it becomes medicine. If you are ready to step into that choice, declare it clearly: I choose conscious empathy. For in that choice lies not only your freedom, but humanity's path forward.